Disclaimer. I am a law student, and the legal information provided is not legal advice. For that, please hire an attorney. So the next person we're going to be talking about, again, very surprised. I have never talked about him on stream before. Very, very surprised. But hey, you know, we got to start somewhere, right? And this feels like a pretty good place to start. Benny Boy, Ben Shapiro, recently made a video, and it's called The Denial of Science and the Truth on Transgender Youth. It's gonna be a ride, folks, so strap in, and yeah. Let me take a sip of my tea real quick before I serve up some real tea, and let's get started.
Joining us on the line is Abigail Shrier. Her new book is Irreversible Damage, The Transgender Craze Seducing Our Daughters. She's a frequent contributor to the Wall Street Journal, and she has an AB from Columbia University, where she received the Uretta J. Kellett Fellowship and a bachelor's in philosophy from the University of Oxford, as well as a JD from Yale Law School. Again, that book is Irreversible Damage. So, Abigail, the book is now out, and it is currently being censored by social media. It is currently being censored by Amazon, which is
unsurprising.
Said that you're not allowed to advertise the book. Obviously, you have committed a great violation and a great sin. So give us the update on what the social media networks are doing to prevent the dissemination of an important message here.
Well, so far they're blocking any ads. My publisher's not allowed to advertise. So if you do a search for my book, if you do a search for issues facing transgender girls or girls identifying as transgender, you will get a series of ads promoting books that think this is wonderful and celebrating it, but they ban a book that is skeptical that this is a very good thing.
And have you heard any sort of actual explanation from them about this? Because obviously these are very much open scientific issues, to say the very least. Like the notion that we have discovered the cure for the suffering of gender dysphoria, and that it invariably lies in gender affirmation and treating 7-year-old boys as 7-year-old girls and treating them with hormones when they're 14. This is a brand new attempt that is being made by many in the scientific community. There is no long-term data available. There's some fairly good data that's being ignored about the number of people who are being given these sorts of transitions and drugs who are unhappy and are transitioning back, or who are saying that they're unhappy. There's some pretty good stats about the fact that suicidality rates are still extraordinarily high for people who are post-transition. So why exactly? What are the messages that are being given by social media to ban this sort of?
Okay, so we have a lot to get through. Hold on, let me just double check. Let me double check and make sure. I wrote this down earlier, right? Or I should say like a week ago, because I saw this like a week ago and I made notes of it, so I knew what to research, right? We have a lot to get through. The first, I'm just going to read off what I have here. Does gender affirmation demonstrably help transgender youth? What is the likelihood / risk of detransition? What are the causes of high trans suicide rates? And let's see. I think those are the main three. Those are the main three I think that we have right now. Does gender affirmation help trans people? What is likelihood / risk of detransition? And what are the causes of the high trans suicide rates? All right. So let's go and look at some research, shall we? Okay. So first, does gender affirmation demonstrably help trans people? Okay. How much? Oh, wow. This is a lot of data. All right. Strap in, folks, because we're going to be reading a decent amount. All right. But it's all good data, so it's important to hear. First, according to the American Psychological Association, gender variant and gender nonconforming people are being denied appropriate gender transition related medical care and mental health care despite evidence that appropriately evaluated individuals benefit from gender transition treatment. Mind you, this is based off of studies from 2005, 1998, 1994, 2006, 1998, 1995, 1999, 1998, and 2005. Pretty long-term data, right? Like, I don't know what Ben is looking for. I don't know if he wants something back into the fucking 1800s, but this is pretty scientifically accurate. Therefore, the APA recognizes the efficacy, benefit, and medical necessity of gender transition treatments for appropriately evaluated individuals and calls upon public and private insurers to cover these medically necessary treatments. So, there you go. The APA literally says that this is good for trans people and that there's long-term data to support it. Furthermore, Cornell University conducted a systematic literature review of all peer-reviewed articles published in English between 1991 and June 2017 that assessed the effect of gender transition on transgender well-being. Thanks for subscribing, by the way. They identified 55 studies that consist of primarily research. Thank you again for subscribing. Oh my God. That consists of primary research on the subject, of which 51 or 93% found that gender transition improves the overall well-being of transgender people, while 4 or 7% report mixed or null feelings. They also found no studies concluding that gender transition causes overall harm. What they found was a robust international consensus in the peer-reviewed literature that gender transition, including medical treatments such as hormone therapy and surgeries, improves the overall well-being of transgender individuals. The literature also indicates that greater availability of medical and social support for gender transition contributes to better quality of life for those who identify as transgender. They also found that the factors that are predictive of success in the treatment of gender dysphoria include adequate preparation and mental health, support prior to treatment, proper follow-up care from knowledgeable providers, consistent family and social support, and high-quality surgical outcomes when surgery is involved. I know, it's a lot of reading, but listen, he said that there's very little or no scientific evidence on this, so we're just going to disprove that with overwhelming scientific evidence to the contrary. Furthermore, in another meta-analysis of studies concerning individuals who underwent sex reassignment surgery, researchers found that after sex reassignment, 80% of individuals with GID reported significant improvements in gender dysphoria. 78% reported significant improvement in psychological symptoms. 80% reported significant improvement in quality of life. And, that's an extra and, I'm going to delete that. 72% reported significant improvement in sexual function, which is interesting, you know. Glad to hear about that. Furthermore, in another longitudinal study, researchers found that transgender people report poorer mental health quality of life compared to the general population. However, meta-analysis in a subgroup of studies looking at the quality of life in participants who were exclusively post-gender-affirming treatment, right, found no difference in mental health quality of life between groups. So let's be clear about what that says. What it says is that when people who are trans, who are pre-transition care or pre-gender affirming care, like when you're a trans person who hasn't had any care, then yeah, your mental health is worse off than the average person in society. But after you receive that care, you're basically the same as everyone else in society, which demonstrably shows an improvement from how people were prior to receiving care. The analysis is that all prevailing academic literature affirms that gender transition and affirming treatment of trans people has demonstrable benefits on their lives. And yes, gender affirmation demonstrably helps people. Okay? It's a lot, but I want to keep this video at least decently short, and we have a lot to get through. The other thing that he said, the other concern that he raised, was the likelihood or risk of detransition. So let's talk about that. Here's a rule. In a systematic literature review of all peer-reviewed articles published in English between 1991 and June 2017, this is the same study that we talked about earlier, or one of the same studies rather, that assessed the effect of gender transition on transgender well-being. Cornell University found that regrets following gender transition are extremely rare, and have become even rarer as both surgical techniques and social support have improved. Pooling data from numerous studies demonstrates a regret rate ranging from 0.3 to 3.8%. I want to let that sink in for a second. People, at maximum, less than 4% of trans people who transition regret transitioning. I just want to let that sink in for a second. Regrets are most likely to result from a lack of social support after transition or poor surgical outcomes using older techniques. Furthermore, a survey conducted by the National Center for Transgender Equality found that detransition is largely due to social pressure. And for over 60% of trans people who detransitioned, it was only temporary. So let's be clear, people. When he says that there isn't, or like that there's this vast, overwhelming number of people who detransition, literally it's less than 5%. And most of it is caused by social issues. So if you want to try and make an argument that detransition is caused by like some regret of being trans, that's just not true. And the evidence largely shows, in fact, the evidence as it's currently available in its totality shows that it's primarily based on social factors. Period. God, we have to get through a lot. He said so many wrong things in such a short amount of time. But hey, listen, we're getting through it effectively. He also said, what is the cause of high trans suicide rates? Let's talk about suicide. Wow, that's really dark. Here we go. So, according to the American Psychological Association, discrimination and prejudice against people based on their actual or perceived gender identity or expression detrimentally affects psychological, physical, social, and economic well-being. Additionally, they say that transgender, gender variant, and gender nonconforming people may be at an increased risk in institutional environments and facilities for harassment, physical, and sexual assault, and receiving inadequate medical care, including denial of gender transition treatments such as hormone therapy. This is important because the reason why people might be suffering very detrimentally mentally is because of these institutional effects on them. Furthermore, the American Psychoanalytic Association claims that bias against individuals based on their actual or perceived sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression negatively affects mental health, contributing to an enduring sense of stigma and self-criticism through an internalization of such prejudice. The more people are discriminated against, the more they internalize it. Surprise. There's probably a connection to Blair White in there. For children specifically, the APA says that many transgender, gender variant, and gender nonconforming children and youth face harassment and violence in school environments, foster care and residential treatment centers, homeless centers, and juvenile justice programs. The APA says that gender and sexual orientation diverse children and adolescents who are victims in school are at an increased risk for mental health problems, suicidal ideation and attempts, substance use, high-risk sexual activity, and poor academic outcomes, such as a high level of abstentionism, low grade point averages, and low interest in pursuing post-secondary education. Surprise! Trans kids who are young and who are discriminated against in school end up idealizing and attempting suicide more. Surprise. The APA also says that minority stress is recognized as a primary mechanism through which notable burden on stigma and discrimination affects minority persons' health and well-being and generates health disparities. Furthermore, they say that gender and sexual orientation diverse young people with intersecting identities face additional challenges to their psychological well-being as a result of the negative consequences of discrimination on the base of sexual orientation and ethnic/racial minority status, religious identity, and country of origin, among other things. This makes a lot of sense, right? If you're already a trans person, and then you're also a trans person of color, of course you're going to face more discrimination and more systemic harm as a result, right? And yeah, that's going to have some negative effects on your mental well-being. This is just intersectionalism as posed by like a reputable scientific institution. This isn't surprising, but this is the proof. This is the proof in the pudding, and there are plenty of studies here that the organization cites as proof for this claim. Furthermore, in a systematic literature review of all peer-reviewed articles published in English this is the Cornell University study. It's pretty comprehensive. It has a lot of stuff in it. What they found was that transgender individuals, particularly those who cannot access treatment for gender dysphoria or who encounter unsupportive social environments, are more likely than the general public to experience health challenges such as depression, anxiety, suicidality, and minority stress. While gender transition can mitigate these challenges, the health and well-being of transgender people can be harmed by stigmatizing and discriminatory treatment. Furthermore, in a broad international study of trans suicide rate, researchers found that gender-based victimization, discrimination, bullying, violence, being rejected by the family, friends, and community, harassment by intimate partner, family members, and police. I just want to draw special attention to that, right? Like, how police treat people can also affect their mental health and well-being, according to the study, according to the source. Just want to point that out there. discrimination and ill treatment at the healthcare system are major risk factors that influence suicidal behavior among trans people. Furthermore, in another study by the UCLA, researchers found that transgender respondents who experienced discrimination or who were a victim of violence were more likely to report suicidal thoughts and attempts. They also found that respondents who experienced family rejection were also more likely to report attempting suicide, and that access to gender-affirming medical care is often associated with a lower prevalence of suicide, thoughts, and attempts. So, what's the analysis? Trans suicide rates are exclusively caused by social factors and circumstances according to the prevailing academic literature. Therefore, trans people do not commit suicide purely by virtue that they are trans. All right? So Ben is just completely, objectively, demonstrably wrong here. Not only is there long-term data on this, there is, like, if it's not clear to you already, a fucking mountain of it. Just to be clear. Is there something else? Does gender... All right, we went through transgender youth, was likelihood, high trans suicide rate. Did we talk about whether or not children can know if they're trans or not? I'm not sure if he brought that up. I know he does at one point. We'll let him talk for a little bit since he hasn't already. And if he brings up again, like, whether or not children can know if they're trans, then we'll talk about that more there. But I've talked a lot. Let's let him say some things.
Message.
Well, usually it's called hate speech of some sort, even to discuss the scientific issue of how are these girls faring? Is it helping their mental distress? Is it alleviating mental distress? Are they engaging with friends and having community, or are they cutting off their parents and dropping out of school? So even talking about the objective measures of how these girls are doing is something apparently you're not allowed to do. My book specifically, they accused me of conversion therapy around sexual orientation. Now, I interviewed a lot of lesbians and other gay people, gay men for the book. This book has nothing to do with sexual orientation. It just so happens a lot of lesbians have a lot to say about it because many of them believe that these girls would naturally be lesbian.
And it is an incredible attempt to conflate. And you have seen scientific bodies attempting to suggest that conversion therapy on gays and lesbians is the same thing as suggesting that a boy who says he's a girl, if you say to him, no, you're actually a boy, maybe we should figure out a way for you to deal with some of your feelings, that this is now conversion therapy. That we are going to treat sexual orientation in exactly the same way we treat gender orientation, which is patently insane. I mean, these are not the same thing. Maybe you can talk a little bit about the differences.
Yeah.
Patently insane, Ben. Patently insane. Let's talk about that. Let's have a chat. Let's have a chat then. Does conversion therapy harm trans people in the same way it harms cis, gay, lesbian, and bi people? Here are some rules. First, according to the American Psychoanalytic Association, psychoanalytic technique does not encompass purposeful attempts to convert, repair, change, or shift an individual's sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression. Such directed efforts are against fundamental principles of psychoanalytic treatment and often result in substantial psychological pain by reinforcing damaging internalized attitudes. Patently insane, Ben. Okay. Furthermore, in 2018, the British Association for Behavioral and Cognitive Psychotherapy signed a letter to the Memorandum of Understanding against conversion therapy, which was launched with the major backing of all major psychological, psychotherapeutic, and counseling organizations in the UK, including the British Psychological Association, the British Association for Counseling and Psychotherapy, and the UK Council for Psychotherapy. The letter was also supported by Stonewall, NHS England. That's wrong. And NHS Scotland. The letter makes clear that conversion therapy in relation to gender identity and sexual orientation, including asexuality, is unethical, potentially harmful, and is not supported by evidence. Lastly, the same organization goes on to say that sexual orientation and gender identities are not mental health disorders, although exclusion, stigma, and prejudice may precipitate mental health issues for any person subjected to these abuses. Anyone accessing therapeutic help should be able to do so without fear of judgment or the threat of being pressured to change a fundamental aspect of who we are. So let's be clear, Ben. When you say that trying to tell a young boy who says that they're a girl, that they're actually a boy, saying that that doesn't have any demonstrable harm on them like it does for other people in conversion therapy. Not only is that not patently insane, it's just wrong. And it goes against the vast majority scientific consensus on the subject. So, you're fine. You can be wrong, but understand that you are wrong. Let's go on.
Yeah, it is really different, and here's why. Conversion therapy for sexual orientation was, involved a lot of grisly practices and also didn't work. But therapy to help someone get comfortable in their biological sex has long been practiced. It's enormously effective, and in fact, that was the reason that for decades and decades, over 70% of kids who experienced any gender dysphoria in childhood would outgrow it. Today, we're up to 18 states actually ban so-called conversion therapy, even for gender identity, so that a therapist.
Good. Yeah, you should ban conversion therapy for gender identity. As we've just discussed, the vast majority scientific consensus is that it is bad, and we shouldn't allow it. So, yeah. And also, everything that she's saying right now is complete. Like, she doesn't give any citation. She doesn't give any evidence for what she's saying right now. So, yeah, considering that we've already provided evidence, the burden of proof is on them to rebut it. And, yeah, no, they just haven't told us why we should take them at their word.
Therapist who wants to help someone get comfortable in their biological sex might lose their license for doing that.
I mean, the crackdown on all of this obviously leads to a lack of assistance. Do we have any long-term data on whether the strategies that are supposedly scientifically verified are successful or not? Because there have been some studies that suggest that gender transition is more successful than non-gender transition. Many of the studies are a very small sample size or non-longitudinal. What have you've looked at the evidence? What do you think about it?
We've actually cited multiple studies, in fact, several of them longitudinal, that they are, in fact, helpful and do have demonstrably beneficial effects to people. We've already discussed them. We're not going to belabor the point.
The treatments that are now being presumed to be successful generally.
So one of the things that they often say is that suicidality is alleviated when someone gender transitions. That is not clear at all. So that gets.
I just want to toss out to everyone. We've already talked about this. This is just like literally demonstrably false. We have like so much evidence. We've gone over so much evidence as to why this isn't right. And to say that there isn't any evidence to the contrary is just like patently. Now that is patently insane right there. So yeah, no, that's just wrong. That's just, yeah, exactly. What a Weasley little liar, dude. What a Weasley fucking little liar, dude.
It's, dramatically exaggerated. We don't know that either gender dysphoria is the cause of suicidality. We don't know that. Nor do we think that nor do we have evidence that gender transition will alleviate that. What we do know is that these girls.
Yes, we do. We already talked about it extensively.
Suddenly identifying as transgender, and they are now the dominant demographic. What they're experiencing doesn't look like gender dysphoria at all.
So maybe you can explain what exactly they're experiencing and the difference.
I want to toss out there to everyone. She just suggested, like, she just made like a semi or like a quasi professional opinion that like what girls, heavy quotations on that, are experiencing is not clear at all, or something to that effect. She is just a lawyer. She doesn't have any medical or professional background. She doesn't know, like, she doesn't have any authority to be able to say this without citing any evidence. And so far, she hasn't cited any evidence. So let's be clear about that as we go forward.
Differences between typical symptomology of gender dysphoria and what these girls are going through right now. Because what you talk about is rapid onset gender dysphoria, this kind of new symptom that we've been seeing where one girl in a particular social group will declare that she is a boy, and then all the other girls in the social group will suddenly declare that they too are boys.
Hey, is Jangles still watching? Is Jangles still watching? I'm not going to belabor this point because actually Jangles has like a ton of really good literature on this, and Jangles has actually like talked extensively about this. When I put out this video, I will just reference people to that. Why you always lying? Yeah, exactly. No, but like when I put this video out, I'm going to reference some of Jangles' videos because like actually he's covered this a lot better than I could in the short time that I want to, or the short time that I have to do it right here. But yeah, the TLDR is that like rapid onset gender dysphoria was like proposed by like one rogue researcher for a university who relied on completely biased data and had like zero academic backing or like zero academic like literature to be able, like, she just completely extrapolated this term from nothing, right? So there are a lot of problems with using this, and it seems like that's where he is getting this idea. So yeah, I'm gonna advise you to go watch Jangles' content on this. And yeah, like everything that he's saying here is just patently wrong.
That's exactly right. So we have a nearly 100-year diagnostic history of gender dysphoria, and it was always something that emerged in early childhood, ages 2 to 4. Little boys would say, "I'm not a boy, call me a girl. I only want to wear girls' clothes. I know I'm a," and they were very insistent about it, and clearly felt severely uncomfortable being boys. Today, out of nowhere, the dominant demographic is teenage girls with no childhood history. And in fact, when you ask them, and Lisa Littman, the public health researcher, did the research.
Lisa Littman, there you go. Yeah, this person is like a gospel to them, because like this one rogue researcher who came up with this completely unsubstantiated and completely biased report is the only person that they could cite, because it's like the only person with any like semi-academic background that can actually like support their position. Completely unbiased, completely credible. Sure, why not? Totally.
Research on this. When you ask them why did they come to this, their answer is very often tied to social media. They discovered it with friends, or they discovered it on the internet. This is not how traditional gender dysphoria emerges.
So when we talk about the possibility
how traditional gender dysphoria emerges, she said nothing about how gender dysphoria emerges. She's no expert on what gender dysphoria is. She hasn't cited a single piece of evidence as to what gender dysphoria is. And like, gender dysphoria can emerge in a number of different ways, right? Like, I think that anyone being able, yeah, Jangles is in the chat. Neat. Even Littman says you can't extrapolate her results to treat trans kids as a whole. Boom! Damn! Isn't that interesting? Isn't that just absolutely interesting to hear? Go watch Jangles' content on it. But anyway, what's important to recognize here is that oh dang, where was I getting to? Oh yeah, gender dysphoria can emerge in a number of ways. It doesn't have to be like this one particular narrative. And yeah, of course it's going to change based on like where society is at and different societal factors, right? That doesn't mean anything inherently in and of itself.
Ability of treating people for rapid onset gender dysphoria, or the prevalence of desistance here. What does treatment like that look like? I think people have this vision when we talk about quote-unquote conversion therapy that is widely outdated. By the way, even outdated with regard to sexual orientation. I mean, there's sort of this perception that taking even if you believe this is ineffective, the identification of sexual orientation, quote-unquote conversion therapy, with what it was 50 years ago, where people were being electroshocked in summer camp, as opposed to now you go talk to a doctor or a priest or.
Ben Shapiro, defender of conversion therapy. What can I say but yikes?
Something who's basically engaging in cognitive behavioral therapy. I mean, even if you believe that's ineffective, the attempt to conflate the two is ridiculous. To conflate that with regard to how people are treated now with regard to gender identity disorder or gender dysphoria is completely ridiculous. What does that look like? I mean, how typically have priests, religious authorities, and doctors treated kids who are coming in with gender dysphoria?
So the way that they treated them was by something called watchful waiting. Ken Zucker really pioneered this, is a wonderful psychologist who I interviewed many times. And what he would do is he looked at the whole child, and he would often say, and this was widely practiced, gender dysphoria, they may be expressing discomfort in their sex, but sometimes the problem is not their sex. Sometimes they have a parent who's not giving them attention until they dress as the opposite sex, or they feel a parent withdraw and only get happy with them when they look or seem like a girl. So they would sort of both try to get at the root of the child's distress. And in some cases, no therapy was required at all, because over time, a child would naturally outgrow it.
Cool. I don't think that this is anything that people necessarily dispute. When you have a child who says that they're trans, yeah, of course the first thing that you should do is take them to like a psychiatrist or take them to get therapy to like make sure that they're able to work out what they're going through. I don't think that that's anything that anyone disagrees on. Yeah, if someone feels like they're trans just because their aunt or whatever is like dressing them up and that's the only way they can get support, then yeah, that's a problem and should be resolved in and of itself. No one disagrees with that. But there's a difference between like acknowledging that we need to take kids to like professionals so that they can get professional medical assistance and professional psychological assistance. There's a difference between that and categorically dismissing the idea that gender affirmation like scientifically and demonstrably helps people like children who are trans. In fact, all right, this is where we're going to go into this. This is where we're going to go into this argument, because this is where this is going, all right? All right. Let's talk about this. Let's talk about trans youth, all right? Does gender affirmation demonstrably help transgender youth? All right? This is another one where there's a lot of it, all right? There's a lot of it, but we're going to get through it. We're going to get through it together, fam, because they're trying to make it out that there's no way that gender affirming health can help trans youth. So let's bury this right now. In a longitudinal, I love it. They said that there's no longitudinal studies. That's literally where we're fucking starting. In a longitudinal study on the effectiveness of puberty suppression and sex reassignment surgery on trans individuals in improving mental health outcomes, researchers found that treatments had unambiguously positive results after gender reassignment in young adulthood gender dysphoria. So mind you, like, this study is talking about like young adulthood, so think like teenagers. Gender dysphoria was alleviated and psychological functioning had steadily improved. Well-being was similar to or better than same-age young adults from the general population. Improvements in psychological functioning was positively correlated with post-surgical subjective well-being. So mind you, right here, this study, and I'm not advocating that like children should get surgery, but like young adults, like teenagers who are of an age where they're able to, like, according to the scientific medical community, is able to get surgery. Yeah, it really helps them. In fact, it has like a statistically significant positive correlation to like positive mental health. Surprise. In another study, researchers found that children who socially transition report levels of depression and anxiety which closely match levels reported by cisgender children, which are in striking contrast to previous work with gender nonconforming children who had not socially transitioned, which found very high rates of depression and anxiety. Which is basically kind of like the culmination of the meme in a study, I just want to be as sad and depressed as everyone else, right? What this study showed was that children who socially transitioned to be treated as the gender that they identified with were now like basically the same as far as their anxiety and depression as cisgender children, right? Their degrees of anxiety and depression had risen to where they were prior, which had been significantly the levels had decreased from where they were, because like before gender affirmation, they had been significantly higher. They had been more depressed and more anxious, but after they started being affirmed as the gender that they are, they actually saw a positive correlation with an improvement in the children's health. Furthermore, the APA recommends that it may be medically and therapeutically indicated for some transgender and other gender diverse children and adolescents to transition from one gender to another using any of the following: change of name, pronoun, hairstyle, clothing, pubertal suppression, cross-hormone treatment, and surgical treatment. Again, mind you, we're not prescribing surgery to like anyone that the medical community would not say to prescribe surgery to. And the same for like cross-sex hormone treatment. But what we are saying, and what the study does show, is that when you have people who are younger, like who are teenagers and younger, giving them gender diverse treatment as is warranted by the scientific and medical community does demonstrably help them. Period. Hold on, is there a fucker in chat? Mods, take care of anyone in chat because I don't want to deal with them right now. I'm doing a bit. But yeah, anyway, so let's go on, shall we? But yeah, the idea that there are only two genders, we already went over it earlier this stream. It's demonstrably false, and if you disagree with that, you're a science denier. Deal with it. Actually, can I do this? There we go. Banhammer. Fuck you. I have the hammer. Also, mods, I don't know, I need to talk to my mods about making sure everyone is spread out enough among all the different places. But anyway, yeah, let's keep going. Therefore, the APA and the National Association of School Psychologists encourages school staff to support the decisions of children, adolescents, and families regarding a student's gender identity or expression, including whether to seek treatments and interventions, and discourage school personnel from requiring proof of medical treatment as a prerequisite for such support. And they recommend that administrators create safer environments for gender diverse, transgender, and intersex/DSD students, allowing all students, staff, and teachers to have access to sex-segregated facilities, activities, and programs that are consistent with their gender identity, including but not limited to bathrooms, locker rooms, sports teams, and classroom activities, and avoiding the use of gender segregation in school uniforms, school dances, and extracurricular activities, and providing gender-neutral bathroom options for individuals who would prefer to use them. In another study, researchers found that trans youth who indicated their parents were strongly supportive of their gender identity and expressions were significantly more likely, 72% exactly, to report being satisfied with their lives than those with parents who were not strongly supportive, 33%. Also statistically significant, 70% of those parents strongly supportive of their gender identity and expression reported positive mental health, compared to 15% of those whose parents were not strongly supportive. The study also found that strong parental support decreased the likelihood of a suicide attempt within the past year from 57 to just 4%. Additionally, while 4% is still far too high, the impact of strong parental support can be clearly seen in the 93% reduction in reported suicide attempts for youth who indicated their parents were strongly supportive of their gender identity and expression. So let's be clear. The vast scientific consensus is that gender affirmation for young children is good and demonstrably increases their health and well-being. Period. This brings up another question. Actually, one that they raised, but we'll talk about it because the evidence on this is pretty concise. Can children and adolescents know that they are transgender? Well, according to the American Psychological Association, some children and adolescents are aware of their attraction to members of the same gender or of their status as a lesbian, gay, or bisexual person by early adolescence, although this awareness may vary by culture and acculturation. Whereas some children and adolescents may experience a long period of questioning their sexual orientations or gender identities, experiencing stress, confusion, fluidity, or complexity in their feelings and social identities, a person's gender identity develops in early childhood, and some young children may not identify with the gender assigned to them at birth. So, yeah, the vast majority scientific consensus is that children can know if they're trans. Gender identity develops very young, and children are able to tell. So, let's be clear. Not only can children know that they are trans from a young age, but it is the scientific and medical consensus that it is good to affirm them in their gender and to provide them with appropriate medical and gender-affirming care. Period. Let's go on.
This was not something that needed a dramatic intervention, nor did it ever get one.
We're speaking about the book Irreversible Damage, The Transgender Craze Seducing Our Daughters by Abigail Shrier. The censorship of the book is in and of itself an amazing story, especially because it seems like it is presaging something even more dangerous, which would be not only the inability to even get out a message, contrary to the popular message that the only solution to any symptomology or even claim of gender dysphoria is surgery and hormone treatment, which is dramatic stuff, but also that if you yourself are a parent, I think this is the next step, is that if you are a parent and your child is at school and reports gender dysphoria and goes home and you say, well, we are going to use watchful waiting, we are going to wait and see if this is persistent or if it persists, that you will then be dragged up before Child Protective Services and you could lose your kid. It feels like this is the predictable next step. And
I mean, yeah, considering that we just looked at like the vast, again, we went over so much academic literature, but considering that we've already established that like there is demonstrable harm by attempting to like convert your child from one gender to another if they express that they have like a transgender identity. Yeah, it makes sense. Like I would certainly hope that like a parent who's trying to like make that child believe that they are whatever they want them to be, would be called out by authorities, right? Like, I would certainly hope so, because that is like child abuse, So, yeah, no, that's a good thing. That's a good thing, according to the modern scientific consensus, Ben.
And I think we're going to see it in the UK and Canada, and then finally we'll see it in the United States if this continues.
Remember that already the schools are not telling the parents. So in California, this is certainly true. They actually have forms they fill out in which if a child is, after being encouraged, steeped in gender ideology and encouraged to come out as one other gender than
gender ideology, probably tells you a lot more about like the credibility of this person than like any individual argument that they make.
Than their biological sex. These schools will then fill out a form, ask them their gender, their new name and pronouns, and the school will keep that from the parents. We do this in California. They do this in New York and New Jersey. I've been told by parents. I know New York's very open about it. So already the undermining of parental authority on this issue is very strong and very extreme. In fact, in California, we have something called spiritual abuse, which is written into the California framework, and that's when kids are taught.
Where is this going? Spiritual abuse? Hey, let's hear it. Let's hear it.
this. If someone tries to, based on religion, make you conform to their idea of biological sex. So they're already being told that their parents are abusers.
Based on their religion, conform to their view of biological sex. Okay. That's not relevant at all. At all. Let's move on.
If they don't go along with this.
This is deeply scary stuff. Pick up the new book. It's Irreversible Damage to the Transgender Craze Seducing Our Daughters. Don't pay attention to social media that's censoring it. Instead, go buy the book. It's still available on Amazon, right? They just won't allow you to advertise it.
It is for now.
Oh yeah, don't pay attention to social media because the overwhelming response on social media is that it's wrong and written by someone who's just a science denier. Yeah, don't pay attention to that. Don't pay attention to that, folks. Just take her at her word. The person who has like no scientific or medical background on trans issues trying to speak authoritatively on trans issues. Yeah, no, listen to her. Don't listen to social media. It's fucking people.
Okay, so we'll see how long it is before Amazon deplatforms it. The good news is there's still alternative markets available, at least for the moment. Abigail Shrier, thanks so much for joining the show. Really appreciate your courage on this issue.
Thanks so much.
What else is there to say, people? This is the first time I've talked about Ben Shapiro on this channel. So I do want to make this point very clear, right? To just point it out, because like, I know that at least a couple people have compared my rhetorical style to him in some ways, right? Sometimes I'm speaking like super fast and I'm able to articulate my arguments super quickly or whatever. We also both have legal backgrounds and we're people with legal backgrounds who engage in sort of like this public discussion, et cetera, et cetera. It's really interesting for me to watch Ben because I can pick out a lot of what he does because honestly, like, people make him out to be like this masterful, you know, or like crazy, amazing rhetorist, right? He just uses a lot of techniques that people in any, you know, who come into the legal profession are taught at like the basic stage of their education, right? Like he thinks and talks like a lawyer, right? And honestly, once you start to learn like all the little rhetorical bits and little snippets that he does here and there, like once you learn to be able to spot those and once you learn how to use them yourself, not only are you able to easily spot them in other people, but you're able to realize just like how full of shit some people are. And I hope that it's very readily apparent to people who are watching this, especially people who watch a video I put out after this goes live. I hope that people are like very acutely aware of just like how much Ben does not know about trans people and how like demonstrably wrong he is about literally everything that he said. He's no like amazingly like intellectually superior authority on fucking anything that he talks about. He's a lawyer. He's a rhetorist. He knows how to like be able to beat people in conversations, but that by no means means that the things that he's saying are objectively correct. It just means that he knows how to use rhetoric. And all that it takes is for someone who actually like has a comparable degree of skill with rhetoric to be able to topple him like single-handedly. So yeah, I don't see him as anyone to be taken seriously in the slightest.